60722.
Me and my family have already had COVID. So now I think will be a good thing so that we don't get infected again.